Welcome to part 2 of your Writer's Workshop assignment for today. Hopefully you have already watched the part 1 video. If you have accidentally clicked on this one first, then you need to go ahead and exit out and watch the other video before coming back to this one. In part 1, we read the passage together and we started going over the paragraphs that I have written for you. We actually went over the introduction paragraph, so as you see on the screen, remember that your introduction paragraph on your paper should look like mine, except you are underlining instead of highlighting. And we're going to go ahead and jump into the body paragraph. I want to remind you all that if you were writing your own on demand, you would have 2 body paragraphs, but for the sake of our assignment for today, I have only written 1 body paragraph. Just remember that your body paragraphs are always formatted the same. They start with a transition word and a topic sentence. They're going to have 2 E1s, 2 E2s, and a concluding sentence. So let's jump in and start talking about your body paragraph that I have for you today. Body paragraphs are always going to start with a transition word. Since this is the first body paragraph, a great transition word to use is the word first. Now, I know that this first kind of looks like it's highlighted in pink. I'm actually calling this color red, so you need to underline the word first with the color red, and then the rest of that sentence you're going to underline with pink because that is the topic sentence. So it states, first, schools should start later because it will improve the emotional well-being of students. I want to remind you all that you get the ideas for your topic sentences straight from your thesis statement that you wrote in the introduction paragraph. So if we look back up at the introduction paragraph, our thesis statement says, schools should start later because it will improve students' emotional well-being and help students learn more. So this first idea that I listed in my thesis is what this first body paragraph is about. If I were going to write a complete on demand, my second body paragraph would be about the second idea, help students learn more. But again, like I just stated, we only have 1 body paragraph today. So you're going to underline the color or the word first with the color red, and then the rest of that sentence in the color pink. This is the topic sentence, and the job of the topic sentence is to tell what the rest of the paragraph is going to be about. So since I stated it's going to make students have better emotional well-being, then everything else in this paragraph needs to talk about that. Right after we have our topic sentence, we're going to jump into our E1. Remember, E1 is evidence. It says in the text, Maggie Pierce explains that adolescent children experience a phenomenon called phase delay in their early teens. This change in their bodies makes it extra challenging to get an appropriate amount of sleep. The text says, being exhausted can make you cranky and sad. Now, I want to point out here that I did have a quote from the text, but I also put some information in my own words. The reason that I did that for this E1 is because there was just a lot that needed to go into this, and so I didn't want to have a huge quote from the text. Instead, I took some of the important information, I stated it in my own words, and I used a shorter quote from the text. Remember, when you are citing from the text, you always want to have a good sentence starter like the text says, and then quotation marks at the beginning and the end of your quote. So the E1 is discussing what the text says, and I'm going to move into my E2, which we are underlining in the color yellow. This is where I explain the information in my own words, and remember it needs to be at least 2 sentences. So I put, this evidence demonstrates the need for later start times because children who feel upset or emotional will not be able to learn at their full capacity because it said they can be cranky and sad, so they're upset and emotional. There is no need to teach students who are unhappy. They simply won't gain the knowledge their teachers are trying to give them. Therefore, school should start later so that students can be well rested and in a better state of mind. So, evidence from the text, and then I explained it in my own words. After your first E1 and E2, you're going to have a second E1 and E2, and you're going to use an internal transition to help your audience move from this first point that you're trying to make to the second point that you're trying to make. So I use the internal transition furthermore, which you're going to underline in the color red, and then I get right into my next E1, so my next piece of evidence. The text says, it can make it hard to concentrate, sit still, and learn. And notice I have quotation marks at the beginning and at the end of that quote. That is our E1, so we're underlining that in blue. Now I'm going to explain that in my own words. I state, again, this evidence indicates that later start times are necessary. Students will not be able to learn unless they are fully rested. Trying to teach them when they're tired and grumpy will lead to frustration for themselves and their teachers. So I took this information, I explained it in my own words. At the end of the paragraph, you're always going to end with a concluding sentence, which we are underlining in the color green, where we just wrap up our thoughts for that paragraph. So I stated clearly, which is a great word to start your concluding sentence with. It is in everyone's best interest for the school day to start at a later time. So again, make sure you underline that in the color green. Now, I've said this several times. I just want to remind you one more time. In a full on-demand, you would have another body paragraph, but we're skipping that today, and we're going to the counter argument. Remember, the job of the counter argument is to take an opposite side. So if someone was arguing against you, what would they say? And then how can you prove that wrong? In the counter argument paragraph, you always start with that opposing viewpoint, which we are underlining in the color gray. I stated, some argue schools should not start at a later time because it will cause scheduling conflicts. So I thought about if someone was arguing against me, what's a point that they might make? And I figured some people might argue that it could be difficult because it could cause scheduling conflicts. That's the opposing argument. The next part is where I prove that wrong. We call that our counter argument, and as you can see in our key, we are underlining the counter argument with pink. I put, however, there have been other schools across the nation who have made the switch to later start times and have been successful. So yes, even though some people could argue it could be difficult for scheduling, the fact is schools have done it and they've been just fine. So that's my counter argument. The rest of the paragraph is structured just like our body paragraphs. We have an E1, an E2, an internal transition, an E1, an E2, and a concluding sentence. My evidence is supporting my counter argument. So if I stated that other schools have done it, I have to give evidence of those other schools. So I put, one such school is Cherry Creek School District in Colorado. When describing this district, Maggie Pierce states, I've got my quotation marks, students have said they are less sleepy during the school day and participate more in first period. I have my closing quotation marks. So my E1 is from the text, and it's talking about an example of a school that has made this switch and has been successful. We are underlining our E1 in the color blue. Then I'm going to get into my E2, where I explain that evidence in my own words. Student participation is key to success in the classroom. Students come to school to learn. Allowing them to sleep in later will help to accomplish this, just as it has at Cherry Creek. Because remember, I said other schools have done it. I'm using Cherry Creek as my example, so when I'm explaining it, I'm going to include that. Then I'm going to have an internal transition. Just like in the body paragraph earlier, I used furthermore as my internal transition. I know this kind of looks like it's pink, but you're going to underline furthermore in the color red. And then I'm getting right back into my next E1. The text states, Meltzer, who led a study, have a typo there, let me go ahead and fix that, of Cherry Creek students, found that students were sleeping more and they stopped falling asleep doing their homework. So the text says I have a good sentence starter, I have my quotation marks at the beginning and the end of my quote, and now in my own words I'm going to explain. This evidence shows, remember that's a great sentence starter to use for your E2s, that later start times not only affect kids in the classroom, but outside of the classroom as well. Students are no longer falling asleep studying outside of class because they are more well-rested thanks to later start times. Then, just like with my body paragraphs, I'm ending my counter-argument paragraph with a concluding sentence to wrap up my thoughts. I stated, based on this evidence, it is clear that more schools should follow Cherry Creek's lead and begin starting later in the day. You're going to underline that sentence in the color green. All right, at the end of your essay, you're going to end with a conclusion paragraph. Hopefully you notice that the conclusion is a lot shorter than the other paragraphs. It's meant to be. The conclusion is going to be your shortest paragraph. It's going to start with a transition, and the best transition you could possibly use in the conclusion is in conclusion. Again, I know this looks very similar to the pink color that I'm using, but this is actually red. So underline in conclusion in the color red. After your transition in your conclusion paragraph, you are going to restate your thesis. So I'm going to scroll up momentarily. The thesis that I had here in the introduction at the end that we underlined in the color yellow. It is the exact same thesis statement that I have right here. I literally just copied and pasted it. Schools should start later because it will improve students' emotional well-being and help students learn more. After you have your transition and your restated thesis, you're going to make some kind of reference back to the introduction. So you could do that by, say for example, you asked a question as your hook. You could answer that question in the conclusion. If there's a point you make in the introduction, you can make that point again at the end. So I stated, it's time for more students to take the plunge and start later in the day. Doing so will ensure students are well rested and ready to learn. And then you're going to end, just like you do with your other paragraphs, with a closing thought, a concluding sentence. You're going to have a closing thought in your conclusion paragraph, and it's really something that's meant to keep your audience thinking about your points and your point of view as they finish your essay. And a great way to do that is with a question. You do want to make sure that it's not the same question that you use as your hook at the beginning. My closing thought here states, don't you agree? Later start times are in everyone's best interest. All right, now that we have made it through the entire essay, please double check and make sure that you have underlined everything in your copy of the text with the same colors that you see on the screen. And once you have done that, you are finished with your Writer's Workshop assignment for today.